So, welcome everybody. Today I will talk about Azure API Management, which is another way of doing multiplexing, something that Nathan was explaining in the session before, but cooler than just building integrations on Power and things like that. So, okay, it doesn't work. My name is Adri Ariste. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and well, currently I'm working at Hellman Worldwide Logistics as a technical architect and application manager, which means I do all the technical things. I'm that person, the go-to person for technical things. And well, as I was saying, today we're going to talk about Azure API Management. The logo on Azure, in case you've seen it sometime. Has anybody worked with API management? Okay. So, and I want to talk about this because I think that in Azure API Management with finance and operations, we may have a nice love story. And I will try to tell you why and explain why I think this, because I really believe that. And first of all, why should we use API management? So my idea is that we stop doing HTTP calls or whatever from FNO or from wherever into FNO. Instead, I like people to use API management with FNO. Why? And what's, in my opinion, something that's wrong with finance and operations, specifically the custom web services? So it's not a problem. It's a problem, but it's not a problem, but it's just my opinion. So from an API developer point of view, custom web services, FNO custom web services are a bit dumb. And I say this because, well, this is the code for a method of a custom web service. And here you can see that it's it's because it was off. It's just a calculator. So we have an add operation that will add two numbers, two integers in this case. So we return this. So three members on a JSON, a status, result, the operation, and a message if we need to pass or send a message to the outbound world. And because I'm using integers, I said, okay, if the value is less than 0, just throw an exception and return this, a KO with -1 and something went wrong. But from an API developer point of view, if we get a successful message operation, we should get a 200 okay HTTP message. And if we have an error, we should get a 400 or 500, depending on how we decide to do that. And is this happening with finance and operations? So if we return this, will we get a 400 or 500? No, we will get a 200. Okay, because, yeah, that's because we are managing error handling. So we are doing error handling, and this will be always at 200. And the problem is that that's not how APIs or classical APIs are built. For example, if you've ever seen an open API specification, you've got different messages. So a 200 is a successful operation. 400 is there is something wrong in your body for the request or something like that. So it's more elaborate. And I will try to fix this and show you how with API management. What else is wrong with FNO? Also related to what Nathan was saying, we are having less and less options to monitor F&O inside LCS. And I don't know if you know, but LCS is going away. It will be deprecated. And I have some doubts about which one of these we are going to get on PPAC. I don't know, honestly. And if this is all the logging we can do, well, that's, at least for me, that's scary. So, API management, why? And how it can help us? Well, we can add security in, it's not really adding security. It's just, we have a more flexible security, but it can be added security too. We can also add policies to limit call rates or add quotas, because I'm not sure if anybody knows which is the limit for throttling in Dynamics. Is there a fixed number? So you don't know. When you get a 429, which is HTTP 429, which is the throttling messages, it's not random. I mean, it's based on the resources of the backend, but you don't have a number. Okay, so if you do more than 1,000 requests per 10 minutes, you will get a 429. No, it's not just how it works. You get a 429 and then you need to take action and retry the calls. With API management, we can add this limit call rates and we can define, okay, we can put a limit on per user basis, per API basis at 1,000 per minute, whatever is the value we need. Another thing we can do is add validation. For example, if we have a custom web service, we can send values that will not work with the custom web service. So if we expect an integer on an endpoint and we send a string, of course the ERP will probably, we will see that later, will give us an error, probably an X++ exception error. So instead, we can use API management to validate which are the input values and which are the allowed values. We can also use API management to transform responses. And this is directly related to what I was saying too. So an HTTP, an API developer is expecting a 200 result if it goes well, and a 400 if it doesn't go well. We can do that with F&O by itself, but we can do that transforming responses on API management. Also related to security, we can segment access with subscription keys. This is something that we could also do inside F&O, so with different user applications, so new application ID for each of the integrations we are building. But subscription keys and another thing called products on API management are really nice. And of course, if you're working on a large enterprise, or not so large, and maybe you don't have just an ERP, maybe you also have a CRM or other systems, and API management is a way of having a central place where you can have all your APIs defined, and it's much easier to not just manage, but give access to users from there instead of going into each of the systems and managing a single access for the ERP, access for the CRM, so on. And well, honestly, there's many more things that I've never tried because, well, in the end, I'm basically focused on F&O, and sometimes there are things that I don't use. Next, I want to talk a bit about, well, the tires we have on API management. So there's an entry one it's called consumption. There are a lot of consumption tires on Azure, which for the first million calls, it's included in the subscription. So it's free. I don't want to say free, but it's free. And then we have other, so higher, depending on the workload, depending on what you need. So there are different features, and for example, the developer tier doesn't have some capabilities that the higher ones, like standard or premium, have, like virtual network isolation. So you can build a virtual network, the API management inside of a virtual network, and have all your resources inside of that virtual network, and it's a more secure way to access. And since some months ago, there are also a version 2 of the standard and premium, I think, which have enhanced capabilities. Then, so once more, why Azure API Management? Well, I want the Dynamics 365 F&O APIs to look not like this. Instead, I want them to look like this, nicer, and more. I mean, it's nicer. By the way, DALI did that. This is all the artificial intelligence we will see today. And what else? I have trust issues. And I think it's good in an ERP implementation, especially when you are working with third parties. So if you're working with a provider that that is accessing your API and sending some kind of data into the ERP, and they say, okay, oops, the endpoint stopped working. Do you know if it really stopped working, or maybe they didn't send the right information? So thanks to the API management, we will have logging, which will allow us to know if they send the wrong information and it's their fault, or we have an issue. And it will be nice logging. I mean, I love it. It's one of the features I love the most from API management. And well, that's all on the slides. So I'm going to show you a bit. So I don't know where it's my screen. There's this. 1 second. Okay. I think the tab went away. Okay. So this is the main API management resource on screen of the resource on Azure. And I just noticed I got the new UI on the left. So if you work with Azure resources, you see that this has changed. Instead, we used to have all the list with all the elements on the left. Nice menu and nice Microsoft for updating that. So the first I want to show you is how our APIs displayed here. So we've got this API menu. We can make it a bit bigger if that's needed. And when we want to create a new API, so you already see that we have some of them here. We just need to click add. And maybe because I've scaled it up, it's not working. Oh, sorry, no, it's always the same. So what we do is we will give the API a name in another display name, and we will enter the web service URL. So I will show you later. In our case, it would be the URL of one of the finance and operations agents, the full URL. And we can add a suffix. And if I write something here, it's hello API. You can see that on the base URL of the API management, you get a suffix. And it's nice because then you have, it's always nice to have consistent naming mentions, and I think this is part of that. And if we go to one of the APIs I've created, we will see this. This is the original one. So here you see the web service URL. In my case, because I'm just showing with a custom web service, I've added this part of, I like to point with my finger. I've added the part of the API services, etc., etc. But you could have only the base URL, and then inside of each method operation, which I will show you now, have the rest of that. And also you see the suffix is a calculator, which defines what the API is about. And if I go to design, yes, I haven't touched anything. You see we have the operations on the left. Let me quickly show you how is the API. Oh, I still haven't opened the Visual Studio. Okay. So the API, it's for a demo. So I created a calculator inside the ERP. It's the most expensive calculator because it's 20 licenses, if I know. And well, it has 4 operations. So it's expensive and not very useful. First calculator. You can see I've got an add method, which is similar to the one I showed on the image. Then I have subtract, which is the same as the add. Then I have a divide, which is the same as the add and subtract. And well, maybe you are thinking that maybe I should check something on the divide method, but we'll get to that later in a minute, because you're right. So once I've created an API on API management, I need to create the operations. When I create an operation, as I explained earlier, I just give it a name. So subtract, select a method. So usually custom web services, or well, always custom web services are expecting a post because you need a body that will pass the values of inside the method in X++. So it's a post, and you say just subtract. And you can add a description, and we'll see more of this later. Then you click Save, and it will add a new method on the API. Let me check. Okay, so on the add and divide methods, I did something which is helpful if you need to work with OpenAPI specifications and send the OpenAPI specifications to third parties, especially developers that work with that. So what I did is, for this, I'll explain later about subscriptions and API keys. For this endpoint to work, it will expect a header, which is required. And the header is named X API key, and it is expecting a string value. What else? We can also define how the request will look like. In my case, I will define that I'm expecting an application JSON content type. This is a sample of the body that we need to pass to the method. And what the request, this is reusable. So here we've got the same. So now I will show. So we've got definitions on this tab, and we can define the request and response. And well, if you've worked with parse JSON on Power Automate, it allows you to paste an example, and it will generate the schema. So this is what an open API will show on the specification. So it's a calculator that accepts the string, It's nice. And why do all that? Okay, so it's very simple. We can export the API as a Open API specification. So Open API is a format that's used, it's almost a standard that's used widely by API developers to share how you should access their API. In this specification, we've got the endpoint that needs to be called, and then with the paths are the operations. In my case, the add, which is expecting a post operation with the XAPI key on the header, which is required, and then it's expecting a body on the format of application JSON, and we can check the schema later on the file. And we've got also example of the two values, though we need it expects two values. One of them is a string. So JSON is very interesting. So if I scroll down and go to the schemas, we see that on the request, it expects a JSON object with two members, value A and value B, which should be integers. And later you'll see why I've created another API that's called the Smart Calculator. And well, this is very useful when you need to share, as I said, how your API needs to be called. And it's also very helpful for documentation. What other features does API management have? Okay, so as I said, it allows you to segmentate security. So imagine you need to give access to a single vendor or third party to the OData endpoint for customers. And instead of creating just an application ID on Azure, add it to your FNO, and then give him the credentials to authenticate, get the token, and check the customers. Of course, they could just change depending on the rights of the user you assign to that Azure API, to that app registration on FNO, they could see more information than needed. But with API management, you could just create a new API that would be used by that third party to access customers. Then if we go to subscriptions, here you can see there are several subscriptions. So these values here are the ones used as the XAPI key header that's used for authentication. In the case of this third party that needs to access customers, we could create just a new subscription. And when you create a new subscription, it allows you to give it a name, customers, and select to which APIs it has access to. So it's not here, but if it were here, I could just select the customers API. And there is another interesting scope, which is the product. A product is, yes, a product is a group of different APIs where you can create, for example, so dump and smart, where you can define a subscription count limit. And if you just need to give it to one user, you can put one here that will only work with that user. And you can give it access to, for example, calculator and smart calculator. And when you dump and smart, and when you create a product and go to subscriptions, you can create, in that case, a subscription for the product instead of the API. And with this dump and smart, So with this subscription, which we could be able to, where is it? Oh, here it is. So with this subscription key, we could access both APIs. So if you have different third parties that need access into specific parts of the ERP, you can create different API endpoints and just give them access to that. So that's why I was saying that it has added security. So maybe it's not added security, it's enhanced because you have more granular, it's a more granular way of saying who has access to what without having to go into the ERP, create new users, assign that user a role for, you can only check the records on the customer table or the data entity for that, and so on. Now, let's say, because maybe somebody is wondering, sorry, how do authenticate, because this is very nice, but how do authenticate from here into the ERP to just use the XAPI key instead of the app registration ID and the secret? Well, if we go to the policies, let me make this. So first, let me explain a bit these 4 blocks. These 4 blocks here, you can see there are arrows between them. They show the flow of how information gets in. So when we get a request, it will go into the front end. Then it will be processed in the inbound processes block. It will be sent into the backend. In this case, it's the F&O instance. And the F&O instance will return a response, which will go through the outbound processing box and return to the client. So in the inbound processing, we can, or in all of them, we can define policies. Let me show you this policy in this case. This is one of the ways to authenticate between the API management instance and the F&O instance. And what we are doing here is basically the same as we do in Postman, which is we get the token on a request, and then we use the token to authenticate. It's exactly the same. We are sending a request called bearer token against the authentication endpoint of our tenant. It's a post operation, and we are sending this body. And it's exactly the same. We are sending the application ID, the resource URL, and if I scroll to the right, we also have the secret. And then it will use what it's returned on the first request to set the header on all requests that go into the API management with the bearer plus the token that the response returned. There is another way of doing this. So, of course, you could have you could access the API management passing the application ID and secret on your request. But one, at least for me, one of the added values of using this is, and that's multiplexing, I think, it's reducing the way of the amount of application IDs that you are creating. Okay, so for each API, you need to create one different application ID because otherwise, I think it's the case of multiplexing. If we use the same application ID with all the APIs, but I don't want to talk about licensing.
You have to create a app registration specifically for this.
Yes.
Okay.
And this,
You tie
so
the same user.
Yeah. I'm dancing on the yeah. So another way of doing that, which I'm not sure oh yeah, on this. So we've got the credential manager. I've been trying to get this running, but I'm having issues. But in theory, you can just add a new credential provider here that uses Active Directory. and in the end, it will be the same. So you provide all the details to authenticate against your tenant with the application ID and secret and resource, and then you just use a a short code inside the policy, and it does the same. But maybe it's a nicer way to have, instead of having the policy on an XML-like file, you just have the credential manager and do all of this there. But well, there are different ways of doing that. Additionally, you can use regardless of this, so you need this to authenticate into F&O, but you can also use OAuth 2.0 to authenticate against the API management. So you would have two OAuth 2.0 queries, one to access the API management instance and one to access the F&O. I like to use the application XAPI keys, the API keys, and because it's simpler and you can expire the API keys, you can just, it's easier to manage. And in case you wonder, maybe an API key is not enough, we need more security, you can always add a policy. On the policy, you can add a requirement like this. Okay, it's not on the pre-built ones, but you can add a requirement on the policy for additional headers and create additional, not API keys, but generate on your site a random value for an API key, so a large string. So you would use for authentication the API key and this value, and it's a mandatory header. So if somebody gets the API key, they won't be able to access the API management instance because they also need the second value you have to add. What else? You see here, there's a V2. So API management allows for API versioning, which is very useful if you need, for example, if you've got an API that a lot of customers are consuming and you got a new customer that, I'm not talking specifically about F&O, so it's more of API design. So you've got an API that you've got hundreds of customers using, and you've got a new customer that has a slightly different requirement for that API. You just can click on the original API, click on Add Version, give it a version name. So when you call the API, you will have a /v3/ the name of the endpoint. So you create this. Oh, sorry. And you get a new API that's independent from the original, and version 2. You can do all the changes that this customer requires without disrupting the work of the others or having to send a new version to them. Of course, you could distribute the new API to the existing customers, and if they want to use it, it's good for them. Now, I'm going to show how the API works. So it's a calculator. I think it's not a mystery for anyone.
It will be the Postman for that. It's not integrated.
The portal. Yes, in the portal there is. It's not, Postman is not integrated, but you've got this test tab where you select an operation, and you can call the API from here. And it has a nice feature which is trace, and it shows all the steps the API management is doing. So it will show you the following. It will show you the call, that's getting to the front end, what's happening at inbound processing step, what is going into the backend after this step, what's being returned and processed here, and what's returned from the backend into the client again. And it's very useful because if you have errors, you can see maybe the error is on the backend because you forgot to add the API key, or there's an issue when the transforming values on the inbound processing, whatever. But yes, I still use Postman because, well, it's very convenient. And the good thing is that you can select the API and you can export it to a Postman collection. So I like Postman because it's a very nice way of having that. But you could use the UI on API management. So here you can see why I got on the definition a string, and it's because I'm passing a string as value A. And well, you can see, so I will send it, but you can see that this is working. And this is what's coming straight out of Evano. So these are the 3 members on the data contract in Evano. And this is the value that's added on all custom services, which, by the way, you can get rid of if you don't want it. You just need to add an attribute to the method definition, I think it is, on Evano. There's a post from Doug Galafeld explaining how to do this, just as a curiosity. And well, we can see that the add operation is working. But what happens with the divide operation? Nobody saw that. So if I send this, it's working. 55 divided by 10, it's 5. Well, it's because it's only taking integers. Because this is the dumb calculator. But what happens if I want to divide 55 by 0? Oh, something went wrong. It's a pity there are no logs. You're right. So what did I do? Is I created a smarter version of the calculator. Not that smarter, but smarter, which on the divide operation is checking if the value B is 0, and now it's taking real values instead of just integers. And if the value B is equal to 0, I'm returning a numeric exception. And on the catch, I'm doing this. I'm catching the numeric exception. I'm returning a KO and -1 as a result. Well, this was a design decision I took that maybe it's not very intelligent. And a custom message. You can divide by 0. And what I did later was create a new API version, a new API, a smart calculator. And this one has something slightly different than on the outbound, which we will see later. It's the same, but here there's something. Now, if I go into Postman and call the smart calculator divide, you will see it does something. So I will do 22 divided by 0. So it does something different than the previous one. So here we can see that I'm just getting this return from the API management instance, a status and a result. This is nicer. This looks like more what's expected by an API. They will always expect to have consistent results when returning values. So yes, a 200 is always a consistent result if you do always the try-catch blocks. But this one is still returning a 200. I'll try to fix that. And I also want to show you how I got to return this instead of the standard finance and operations values. So if I go to the outbound policy, which is, as I explained before, what's returned by the ERP, we'll go through this. And here we will transform the values of the operation. So if I go to the outbound piece of the policy, which is this piece, what I'm doing is, in the end, it's code. So when the status code of the response is a 200, and on the status there is a can't be 0, I think I did so many changes to the API, to the code on X++ that this was lost. Well, I'll try to explain, and I probably can fix it. If this is the message that I'm returning, I will set the status of the response as a 400, and the reason is a bad request. And here on the set body, I'm returning, instead of the response that the ERP is sending, which would be the context.response, I'm creating a new JSON object that will have two members, status and result. This is in the case that we are getting a candiv0 message. And if we don't get a candiv0 message, which is when the operation is successful, we will just return 200 OK. We will, with this line, I'm retrieving what's returned from F1O, and I'm just accessing with the parm status and parm result. I'm retrieving the values of the members from the F1O response. I'm creating, the same as here, I'm creating a new JSON object with a status and result member. So both operations, when something goes wrong and when something goes fine, are the same, which is, from an API design perspective, is what is expected. Now, because, as I said, I did so many changes to the code, I changed this, and instead of AO, I need to get here a candiv0. And I should have enough time to do this. So, thanks to the new unified development environments, I can quickly change this and deploy to, to the environment. Mine. So if you are ever presenting a session, don't do last minute changes, because I do, and this is what happens. If you haven't tried the new unified developer experience, or if you tried it some months ago, now is so much better than 3 months ago. All the tools are configured after downloading the extension or after connecting to Dataverse. And well, not now because I'm logging into the environment, but once you've logged, deploying the changes is much faster than 3 months ago. Well, in the meantime now, I can show you something else. So as you can see, I need to say it, otherwise I'm not renewed as an MVP. There's a copilot here, copilot. I think with this I've set it enough this month. But because I don't have access to the Azure Copilot, which is not just for API management, it's for a lot of products of Azure, it's not enabled for me. And now just let me do this. Okay, it will deploy the changes and hopefully still work. Now, I said about I don't trust, I have trust issues. So when I get someone saying, oh, this doesn't work, the first thing, because it's me, the first thing I think is you did something wrong, not I did something wrong, because as you've just seen, I do nothing wrong ever. So on the API management, we can define a logger. A logger is just a way of having logs. We can send the logs to application insights, Azure Monitor, which is more or less the same, or local, which I've never tried, honestly. In my case, I have deployed a log analytics workspace with an application insights instance that is reading from that workspace. And if I go to the log analytics workspace, to the application insights instance. Come on, I'm logged in. Meanwhile, it's going on. Here it is. So if I go to the application insights and go into monitoring logs, and has anybody else used application insights and log analytics? No. Okay. So application insights uses this query language, which is called Gusto query language, which it resembles a bit SQL, but it doesn't. So I can query the request table. And for example, we can see, so let me filter it because I enabled how it's called, a status check, so it's monitored, but because it's not fully configured, I get all these requests every minute, several times every minute, as you can see, and it's a 404, so I will filter out this where success equal true, and we see, I love this, we see the calls that have gone into the API management. We've got to which endpoint did they go? And what's nicer is we can see which body it went into the API management. So when somebody calls you and says, your API is not working, and ask, hey, which body did you send? I don't know. You can go into here, get the body, and test the API with these values and see if the problem is that maybe the body was not the right one or there is some issues on your backend. Well, it shows a lot of data, as you can see. So you have even the API, the IP from where the call has been made, which looks like we're in California. Well, I guess that there's some kind of VPN into the US in the Microsoft office in Lisbon. And well, so it's really nice. I mean, the thing I like the most is I have the details of which API was called, the version, the body, and also the response. So you have the full details. And if I have, well, I don't have time, but I will try. So, okay, so the changes have been done. I go back to the smart calculator and try to divide by 0. And now I should get a 400. Yes. Thank you. So, which is what I wanted to show, which is if you're building so you're using an API management instance and you want to build up something that resembles an API for a software developer that's not working with Avano, you need to get a 400 when it goes wrong, because one of the values in this case on the request is not the expected value. And I think that's all. Yeah. So if there are any questions or
Yes, how you're calling from your expert plus, how you're getting the token for the API? Are you using any namespaces, DLL?
the token?
Yes, you need to get the token to authenticate yourself.
Yeah, the token, I'm getting it here. So on one of these cards, on the inbound processing policies, I'm just setting the token of each call here. So that's what I showed before. I'm sending a request to the authentication endpoint with this body, which is like what we do on Postman. This returns the token, the same as we got in Postman, and it will use it. So it sets it. It's the same. It sets the header.
The expert plus type, can you show from the Visual Studio?
So there's nothing regarding authentication on
Is it like
X++.
your hard coding?
No, it's here. Oh, and the secret, okay. The secret, yeah. So you can see here that I'm using this naming, yeah. So app ID and secret are stored under, it's not hard coded. It is, but it's not. So there is this name values menu where you can add, so I store the app ID and secret into a key vault, and this gets it. The key, you can make the key vault expire. So the secret will expire, but you can also set expiration dates on the key vault. So it's more expiration than needed. And it gets retrieved on here. And then the API management instance does the call to get the token, authenticate. Of course, as I said, you could pass the token on your on the body of your request and use it on the same place instead of storing it on a key vault or whatever.
So you authenticate, you repeat the authentication for every call or just to get the
Yeah,
token for the
I
first?
repeat for every call. So some time ago, so I've done it. I got the token. Was it? I'm not sure. I should check it because, yeah, you're getting a token each time you call the API. I haven't, not with this. I tried it with another thing. I have mixed that. But I'm not sure if there's a way. Probably you can store it on a named value, or I can try that to reduce the cost, because otherwise it's 2 calls per call.
Yeah.
And
what's the extra delay that Azure API Management?
it's not that much. That was also one of the concerns, and it's something you can see on the. You can see here. So you have the duration of the call, including the call to the backend. Yeah. And then, of course, it's API management and with Up Insight. So you can have a detailed graph of average call time and a lot of details. And for example, I've used logs to detect duplicate calls because, for example, an integration that's using the data management framework REST API, sending packages that create journals, and some journals were being duplicated. We didn't know why. I said with application insights, you can create alerts based on a Gusto query. So what I was doing, I was checking every 15 minutes if there was duplicate calls to the same endpoint for the same company with the same prefix for the, for example, accounts payable data packages. And well, we detected why the duplicates were being created.
Possible cache response.
Yes, but not on this instance because it's the cheapest one. but API management, so it has caching capabilities. So pricing, here it is. So for example, the consumption one, which is the one I'm using, has no built-in cache, but all the other ones that do. And well, you can see that depending on the level of
external cache, what's the difference between built-in cache?
I think this is the external. So if you get the same request twice, you will get just one response from the backend because the other should be returned by the cache. But I haven't tried because I should deploy a basic or does developer allow that? Nice. I will try because it makes sense. Because if you're having the same call over and over and over and over, you can't just, well, depending on the call, because it's an ERP and information can change, but in a calculator would make a lot of sense because that won't change. And well, finally, if you want to learn more, you can go to my blog. I've written 3 articles more, and in the end of May, after Dynamics Mind, I will publish another one about API Ops, which is a way of moving changes between 2 API management instances. So you do development on API management, and pipelines will extract information from the development one and publish it to the UAT in production. And well, thanks to the sponsors, and thanks for coming to see my session.